Ode to the Abyss. The opening chords of Ode to the Abyss ripped through the stadium, a guttural scream forged from feedback and distorted bass. A tidal wave of bodies surged forward, drawn by the sonic maelstrom. 50,000 souls, a roiling, sweaty mass, united in blasphemy. Barth Nightshade, bathed in crimson light, stood at the precipice of the stage, a silhouette of pure defiance against the inferno behind him. Victor Ravage Martel, perched on a stack of amplifiers stage left, grinned, a gold tooth glinting under the strobes. The sheer audacity of it all still thrilled him. He took a swig from a flask of something amber and potent, the burn a welcome counterpoint to the Arctic air blasting from the industrial fans. The crowd was a kaleidoscope of leather, spikes, and painted faces, a testament to their shared rejection of, well, everything. Then Barth began to sing, or rather, to roar. His voice, a raspy growl that could curdle milk, climbed the scale of obscenity. The lyrics, each syllable a deliberate act of iconoclasm, echoed through the stadium, amplified to a deafening roar. Mother of lies, immaculate deceit. Your gilded cage holds only weakness. I spit upon your holy name. The camera zoomed in on Barth's face, capturing every vein throbbing in his neck, every drop of sweat glistening on his brow. His eyes, usually hidden behind corpse paint, burned with an unsettling intensity. It was a face possessed, a conduit for something ancient and malevolent. Victor watched the crowd. Some were ecstatic, fists pumping in the air, screaming along to every word. Others were visibly horrified, faces frozen in a mixture of shock and disgust. A few were even weeping, clutching at rosaries and whispering desperate prayers. The schism was the point, of course. Barth relished the division, thrived on the outrage. The song built to its crescendo, a cacophony of blast beats and guttural screams. Barth stalked the stage, a predatory beast unleashed. He grabbed the microphone stand, bending it backwards until it snapped, a metallic shriek piercing the air. Then, he unleashed the line that had become his signature, the verse that had sparked riots and earned him death threats, "Virgin whore, your halo a crown of thorns. I defile your sacred image with every breath. Your son, a weakling nailed to a cross. The abyss awaits your pathetic reign." The stadium erupted. A wave of pure, unadulterated chaos. Mosh pits opened up like sinkholes, swallowing bodies and spitting them back out. Security guards, overwhelmed and outnumbered, retreated to the perimeter, their radios crackling with panicked reports. Victor watched it all unfold, a detached observer in the eye of the storm. He wondered, not for the first time, if they had gone too far. He took another swig from his flask, the liquor doing little to soothe the gnawing unease in his gut. The money was good, the women were plentiful, and the fame was intoxicating. But beneath the surface, a hollowness lingered, a void that all the excess in the world couldn't fill. He looked at Barth, lost in his performance, a man consumed by his own creation. Victor wondered if Barth felt it too, this emptiness. Or if he was simply too far gone to notice. As the final chords faded away, leaving a ringing silence in their wake, Barth raised his fist in the air, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. The crowd roared its approval, a legion of the damned worshipping their dark messiah. Victor Martel sighed, and emptied the last of the amber liquid. He knew that this was just the beginning. The abyss had been invoked, and there was no turning back now. The world was about to be engulfed. Shattered faith. The screech of chalk on slate grated like the hunger pangs twisting in Barth's stomach. Sister Agnes, her features permanently sculpted into a mask of disapproval, droned on about divine conception. Sunlight, fractured by the stained glass Saint Sebastian, a tapestry of agony pierced by countless arrows, splintered across the floor in pools of crimson light. Barth, a tangle of limbs crammed into his too small uniform, defaced his catechism with sketches of infernal glyphs. The regimented desks felt like cells, each murmured supplication a chain binding him tighter. He craved the solace of the woods bordering the orphanage, the yielding coolness of soil beneath his feet, the wild shriek of wind song through the pines, anything to escape this piety that smothered him. He pictured his father, not in his Sunday best, but wrestling with the engine of their dilapidated Ford, a smudge of grease on his cheek, a cigarette clinging to his lip. He recalled his mother's joyous cries as she chased him through the flower beds, her apron dusted white with flour. Memories, vivid and breathing, that Sister Agnes and her dogma sought relentlessly to obliterate. The shriek of tires still shattered his sleep. The grinding collision, the explosion of glass, the biting reek of gasoline, a horrific concerto that played endlessly in the chambers of his mind. He was 8 years old. They were returning from his aunt's, the radio crooning along with their voices. Rain glazed the road. A semi-truck spun out, its headlamps searing. He remembered his mother's scream, a sound abruptly extinguished. Then, oblivion. He awoke swathed in white sheets, his arm encased in plaster, the air thick with antiseptic and unspoken sorrow. A somber priest, his face a study in grief, delivered the news. God had claimed them. For reasons Barth, even now, for decades hence, remained powerless to comprehend. The funeral unfolded in a haze of black crepe and weeping faces. He stood, a diminutive, forsaken figure amidst the throng, gazing at the gleaming surfaces of the coffins. Numbness reigned. Not sorrow, not grief, merely a glacial emptiness threatening to consume him. Back within the orphanage's sterile walls, in the starkness of his tiny room, the shell of emptiness began to fissure. His gaze fell upon the crucifix presiding over his bed, the rosary slung across the nightstand, the prayer cards depicting placid saints. They taunted him. Symbols of a faith that promised sanctuary, that offered comfort, yet delivered only devastation. Rage, a furnace of fury, ignited within him. He wrenched the crucifix from the wall, the base metal contorting in his grasp. He shredded the rosary, the beads scattering like discarded promises across the floor. He seized the prayer cards, tearing them to tatters, the faces of the saints dissolving into distorted fragments. He clawed at them, screamed at them, until his voice was a rasp and his hands trembled uncontrollably. He was alone. Utterly, irrevocably alone. God had forsaken him. And in that instant, Barth renounced God. He would chart his own course, sculpt his own fate, even if it meant descending into the abyss. Anything offered reprieve from this hollow existence, this suffocating devotion that had yielded only anguish. He spat upon the remnants of the defiled prayer cards, a final act of rebellion, a declaration of war against the heavens themselves. 40 years of darkness. Crimson strobes painted the thrashing pit below in hellish hues. Stage left, perched atop amplifier stacks, Victor observed Barth, a stark figure silhouetted against the incandescent blaze. Barth howled the final lines of Desecration of the Sacred Heart. 40 years etched in that scream. A sudden burst of pyrotechnics banished the shadows, exposing the transfixed faces of the acolytes. They roared in response, fists raised in rebellious devotion. 40 years feeding their fury, their dissent, their ache. Eternal blasphemy, a cultural fixture. Album covers flickered through Victor's mind like a lurid slideshow, sacrilege incarnate, unholy rites, depths of depravity, each a calculated affront. He recalled their origins, cramped, gritty venues, crudely printed flyers. Now, stadiums echoed with their sound. Their concerts had evolved into extravagant multimedia productions, theatrical spectacles of sound and light. The compositions were now impeccably crafted, undeniably potent, yet sterile. The visceral grit, the raw urgency that had propelled their early work, had dissipated, supplanted by deliberate provocation. Victor hopped down from the amps, moving toward the backstage entrance, the crowd's roar diminishing as he slipped through the heavy curtain. The mansion loomed, a Gothic abomination, Barth's personal shrine to the sinister. Grotesque figures jutted from the roof, their stony visages fixed in perpetual scorn. Inside, the air was thick with the cloying aroma of incense and age. Gloomy tapestries depicting scenes of biblical torment decorated the walls. Skulls, human and animal, were strewn amongst the antiquated furnishings. Barth sat enthroned in a high-backed chair, a gaunt spectre draped in funereal velvet. A half-finished glass of some inky concoction sat beside him. He offered no greeting. Another full house, Victor stated, his voice devoid of inflection. Barth swirled the contents of his glass. They grasped the essence. Do they, Barth? Or are they simply enthralled by the show? Barth finally raised his gaze, his eyes, usually obscured by shadow, burning with an unsettling light. What's that supposed to imply, Victor? It implies that our message has become muted. We're merely ranting. Ranting is our essence. It's what we've always embodied. Barth slammed his glass onto the table, the sound reverberating through the vast chamber. It once held significance. It was rooted in genuine emotion. Now, it's just clamor. Victor gestured around the opulent chamber, encompassing the ghastly artwork, the morbid trophies. Survey this spectacle, Barth. You've erected a monument to your own despair. Barth rose, towering over Victor. And what course would you prescribe, Victor? Repentance. A plea for absolution. He spat the words with venomous intensity. After 40 years of scorning their beliefs. After 40 years of unwavering rebellion. I'm at a loss, Barth. But this charade isn't it. This is pure theater. And my role has grown tiresome. Barth's face contorted in a sneer. Then depart. Leave this place. See if they embrace you, the returning prodigal. But don't expect solace when you discern that the world beyond these walls is even emptier. He dismissed Victor with a contemptuous wave. Now begone. I have rights to oversee. Victor lingered for a moment, the weight of 4 decades a crushing burden. Then, without another syllable, he turned and departed, leaving Barth to his dark dominion. The gargoyles watched his retreat, their stony faces impassive, their silent condemnation echoing in the desolated spaces of his soul. Night terrors. Barth bolted upright, a guttural scream ripped from his throat. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, each beat a painful reminder of the terror that still clung to him. Sweat plastered his hair to his forehead, soaking the thin cotton of his t-shirt. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the digital clock on his nightstand, 3:17 a.m. Again. He scrubbed a hand across his face, trying to wipe away the lingering images. They were always the same, yet always different, each night a fresh layer of grotesque horror painted onto the canvas of his subconscious. Tonight, it had been the Virgin Mary, but not as he knew her from childhood. This Mary was a twisted parody, her eyes vacant black pits, her smile a jagged, blood-red gash. She held a baby, but the child was wrong. Scaly skin, reptilian eyes, a mouth filled with needle-sharp teeth. He shuddered, pulling the sheets around him like a shield. The dreams had started subtly, weeks ago, just unsettling images that faded quickly upon waking. Now, they were vivid, visceral, leaving him shaken and disoriented for hours. He stumbled out of bed, needing air, needing escape. He padded barefoot to the window, pushing it open and inhaling the cool night air. The city sounds, usually a comfort, felt alien, distant. He was alone in his terror. The memories of the dream still flickered behind his eyes. A church, but the stained glass windows were shattered, replaced with crude drawings of inverted crosses and pentagrams. A priest, his face obscured by shadow, chanting in a language Barth didn't understand, yet felt deep in his bones. It was a language of pain, of desecration. Then, the flash of his own past. A young Barth, kneeling before an altar, eyes wide with fervent belief. The image dissolved into another, of him on stage, microphone in hand, screaming blasphemies against the very figure he now saw contorted in his nightmares. He gripped the windowsill, knuckles white. What was happening to him? He thought of Dr. Albright, the therapist he'd been seeing sporadically for years, mostly to appease his ex-wife. Maybe it was time for another session. The next morning, he found himself sitting in Dr. Albright's sterile office, the scent of antiseptic and herbal tea thick in the air. He recounted the dream, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Dr. Albright listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she steepled her fingers beneath her chin. Barth, you've spent your life suppressing a significant part of yourself, haven't you? Your upbringing, your beliefs, the very things you've built your career on rejecting. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It's just a dream, he mumbled. Dreams are rarely just dreams, Barth. They're often the language of the subconscious, a way for your mind to process what you're unwilling to confront consciously. These images, these distortions, they're likely manifestations of the conflict within you. Conflict, he scoffed. There's no conflict. I made my choices. Dr. Albright sighed softly. Denial is a powerful force, Barth. But it can only hold back the tide for so long. Suppressed emotions don't disappear, they fester. And sometimes, she paused, her gaze intense, they return in forms you can't control. Her words resonated with a chilling truth. He knew, deep down, that she was right. He'd buried his past, his faith, beneath layers of defiance and rebellion. But the past, it seemed, was not so easily silenced. It was clawing its way back, fueled by the darkness he had embraced, twisting the sacred into the profane, and haunting his waking hours with the specter of his own damnation. The night terrors were just the beginning. He could feel it. Collapse in Rome. Rome roared. A sea of faces, illuminated by the infernal glow of the stage lights, chanted along, their voices a guttural chorus of defiance. No God, no Virgin, no crown. Eternal blasphemy was playing to a sold-out stadium, a blasphemous symphony echoing within spitting distance of the Vatican. Victor, Ravage Martel, stood in the wings, the bass thrumming through the floor and vibrating in his bones. He should have been exhilarated. This was his band, his creation, the culmination of 40 years spent spitting in the face of the divine. But a hollowness gnawed at him, a feeling that success had come at too steep a price. Barth, the frontman, the architect of their sonic sacrilege, stalked the stage like a possessed preacher. His face, a canvas of corpse paint, was contorted in a snarl as he unleashed another verse of anti-religious venom. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of black leather and raw, unfiltered rage. Yet, even from this distance, Victor noticed something amiss. A tremor in Barth's hand as he gripped the microphone, a slight hesitation before launching into a particularly vitriolic scream. The crowd was a frenzy, a churning mass of bodies, their fists pumping in time with the relentless blast beats. The air crackled with energy, a palpable sense of rebellion and transgression. But Victor couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, Barth's voice hitched, the carefully cultivated growl cracking into a ragged gasp. He stumbled, his hand flying to his chest, clutching at the pentagram hanging there. The chanting faltered, a ripple of confusion spreading through the crowd. Barth's eyes widened, a flicker of something akin to fear flashing across his painted face. He opened his mouth, as if to speak, but only a strangled wheeze escaped. He swayed, his legs buckling beneath him. The music screeched to a halt, the sudden silence deafening. The stage lights dimmed, plunging the stadium into near darkness, save for a few scattered spotlights that cast long, distorted shadows. Then, with a sickening thud, Barth collapsed. The roar of the crowd transformed into a collective gasp of shock and disbelief. A few scattered screams pierced the silence, followed by a murmuring unease that spread like wildfire through the stadium. Victor surged forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. He shoved past stagehands and security, his mind racing, disbelief warring with a cold, creeping dread. He reached Barth's side, kneeling beside the fallen iconoclast. Barth lay motionless, his face pale beneath the corpse paint, his chest barely rising and falling. His eyes were closed, his lips slightly parted. The pentagram rested against his still chest. Barth! Victor shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. He shook him gently, but there was no response. The stage lights flickered back to life, revealing the scene in stark detail. The band members stood frozen, their faces etched with horror. The crowd was a sea of bewildered faces, their chanting replaced by hushed whispers and nervous coughs. The weight of the moment crashed down on Victor. Barth, the unshakable, the defiant, the man who had spent his life railing against mortality, was lying helpless at his feet. The carefully constructed image of invincibility had shattered, revealing the fragile human beneath. This wasn't just a collapse. It was a reckoning. A sister's prayer. Cardiomyopathy, the doctor said, the word echoing in the sterile, brightly lit room. Barth stared at the men, his face a mask of disbelief. A rare form. It weakens the heart muscle. Makes it difficult to pump blood. So what does that mean? Barth finally managed, his voice raspy. The doctor adjusted his glasses. It means your heart is failing, Mr. Meyer. We can manage the symptoms for a while with medication, but ultimately, a transplant is your best option. Barth snorted, a dry, humorless sound. A transplant. You know who I am, right? Good luck finding a heart for a washed-up metalhead who's pissed off half the population with his lyrics. The doctor's professional demeanor didn't waver. We assess candidates based on medical suitability, Mr. Meyer. But I must be frank. Given the rarity of your condition, and the other factors, your chances are slim. Barth felt a cold dread creep up his spine, a feeling far more chilling than any he'd ever conjured on stage. Slim, he repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Hundreds of miles away, within the tranquil walls of the convent of the Sacred Heart, Sister Maria Angelica knelt in the chapel, the scent of beeswax and incense heavy in the air. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the stone floor in vibrant hues. The Mother Superior had summoned her just moments before, her face etched with a sorrow that mirrored the one now blossoming in Maria's own chest. "Your brother, Bartholomew's," the Mother Superior had begun, her voice gentle. "He is unwell." Now, the news reverberated through Maria's soul. Bartholomew's. After all these years, the name still carried a weight of both love and pain. She closed her eyes, picturing his face, a younger version, before the piercings, the tattoos, the darkness that had consumed him. She began to pray, her voice a soft murmur against the silence. "Holy Mother, hear my plea. Intercede for my brother. Guide him towards the light." Each word was a bead on a rosary of hope, a desperate attempt to penetrate the wall he had erected around himself. Later, Maria sat in her small cell, the only sound the gentle rustling of the wind through the ancient oak tree outside her window. On her desk, tucked away in a worn leather box, lay a photograph. She carefully lifted it out. 2 children, a boy and a girl, stood side by side, their arms wrapped around each other. Bartholomew's, maybe 8 years old, grinned mischievously, his dark hair tousled. Maria, a year younger, beamed at him, her eyes filled with adoration. The photo was faded, the edges frayed, but the love captured within was still vibrant. She traced the outline of Bartholomew's face with her fingertip, a silent promise forming in her heart. She would not give up on him. Not now. Not ever. She would pray for him, fight for his soul with every ounce of her faith. It was a battle waged in silence, a war fought on her knees, but Maria knew, with unwavering certainty, that the power of prayer could move mountains, could even pierce the darkest heart. The photograph warmed her fingertips as she clasped it tightly, then returned to her knees. Echoes of regret. The hiss of the oxygen tank, a mechanical jeer, underscored the pandemonium within Barth's skull. Behind his closed lids, faces danced, a rogues' gallery of those he'd wronged. Hemlock, stripped of his land. Greta, the abandoned barmaid. Even Father Michael, victim of his ceaseless mockery. They sneered, their unspoken rebukes a relentless assault on his unraveling sanity. A ragged inhale tore from his throat as he scrabbled at the coarse hospital blanket, its sterile touch offering no solace against the inferno that raged in his bones. Painkillers blunted the physical edge, but did little to quiet the clamor of remorse. A lifetime spent erecting a bastion of defiance, painstakingly built, was now collapsing, exposing the terrified boy he'd long suppressed. A light tap broke the heavy silence. He squeezed his eyes tighter, desperate for solitude. He couldn't bear witnesses to his downfall, this humiliating spectacle. The door yielded with a groan. A subtle fragrance, beeswax mingling with a delicate floral scent, wafted into the stale air. Bartholomew. The voice, a hesitant whisper, was unmistakable. Maria. His sister. The one he'd scorned, dismissed, severed all ties with the moment she'd taken her vows. 30 years of silence. He kept his eyes sealed shut. "Get out," he croaked, his voice thick with phlegm and resentment. Maria remained. He sensed her presence, a quiet, unyielding energy. "I heard you were unwell," she murmured. "I came to see if you needed anything." A dry, humorless sound escaped him. "Need. I need you to vanish. Take your sanctimonious drivel and just go." He heard the soft swish of her habit as she neared the bed. He could almost taste her pity, a cloying sweetness he couldn't endure. "I brought you this," she said, her tone steady. Reluctantly, he slit one eye open. Maria stood beside him, concern etched on her face, holding out a simple rosary crafted from wood. The beads, polished smooth with time, caught the faint light. He averted his gaze. "I don't want your beads. Or your prayers. Or anything from you. Bartholomew," she implored, a sorrowful note that cut through his anger. "Let me. Let God." He bristled with fury, a primal urge to hurt. "Too late. You think pious murmurs can erase a lifetime of," he faltered, words failing him to describe the extent of his transgressions. "There is always redemption," Maria asserted, her gaze unwavering. He surged forward with surprising force, considering his weakened state. Grasping her wrist, his fingers bit into her skin. "Redemption. There is no redemption. Not for me. I'm going to the abyss, Maria, and I'm dragging everyone down with me. Her expression didn't waver. Only her eyes seemed to darken, reflecting a profound, bottomless grief. He released her as though scalded, recoiling against the pillows, struggling for air. "Leave," he rasped, barely audible. "Just, leave me be." Maria lingered, her gaze fixed on his face. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of ages, she placed the rosary on the nightstand. "I'll be praying for you." She turned and moved towards the exit, her footsteps muted by the linoleum. At the threshold, she paused, glancing back with a flicker of something akin to hope in her sorrowful eyes. Then, she was gone, leaving him once again to the torment of his guilt. The blackout and the vision. The blizzard had teeth. It gnawed at the hospital windows, a relentless white fury that seemed determined to devour the building whole. Inside, the wind howled through unseen cracks, a mournful dirge accompanying the insistent beep of life support machines. Barth shivered, not just from the cold seeping into his bones, but from a primal fear that resonated deep within him. He watched the snow piling against the glass, a suffocating blanket threatening to bury them all. Then, the lights flickered. Once. Twice. A collective gasp swept through the ward. A nurse hurried past, her face etched with worry, muttering something about backup generators. But before she could reach the nurse's station, the fluorescent tubes sputtered their last, and the room plunged into absolute darkness. The beeping of the machines died with them, replaced by a chilling silence that amplified the storm's rage. Panic flared. A woman screamed. Someone cried out for a doctor. Barth closed his eyes, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt a strange lightness, a detachment from his body as if he were floating above the chaos. Then, he was somewhere else. Gone was the sterile scent of antiseptic, the hushed whispers of the ward. He stood on a barren landscape, a desolate expanse of cracked earth under a perpetually twilight sky. The air hung heavy with the stench of decay, and a bone-chilling wind whistled through skeletal trees. In the distance, monstrous figures writhed and moaned, their forms shifting and indistinct, yet undeniably malevolent. They were echoes of sins, given form, feeding on despair. Barth recognized them. The grotesque parody of a priest represented his blasphemies, the leering succubus embodied his hedonistic indulgences, the hollow-eyed child, his neglected responsibilities. They reached for him, their touch promising eternal torment. He recoiled, stumbling backward, a guttural cry escaping his lips. "No. This can't be," a voice, raspy and mocking, echoed around him. This is what you have earned, Bartholomew's. A lifetime of defiance, a symphony of sacrilege. The voice seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath his feet, vibrating through his bones. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the weight of his transgressions pressed down on him, suffocating him with guilt. He was trapped, condemned to wander this nightmarish realm for eternity. Then, a light. A single point of brilliance, impossibly bright, pierced the oppressive gloom. It grew rapidly, pushing back the shadows, bathing the desolate landscape in a warm, radiant glow. The monstrous figures shrieked and recoiled, their forms dissolving into the darkness from whence they came. At the heart of the light, a figure materialized. A woman, her face serene and compassionate, her eyes filled with an infinite love. She wore a simple blue robe, and a crown of stars adorned her head. The Virgin Mary. Barth fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He had denied her, mocked her, blasphemed against her for decades. Yet, here she was, offering him salvation. "Bartholomew's," she said, her voice gentle and soothing, "you have strayed far from the path. But it is not too late to return." He looked up at her, his heart filled with a desperate hope. Is it possible? After all I've done?" She smiled, a radiant expression that banished the last vestiges of fear. "All things are possible through faith and repentance. You have been given a second chance, a glimpse of what awaits you if you persist in your wickedness. Choose wisely, my son." The light began to fade, the landscape around him dissolving back into the familiar darkness of the hospital room. The rhythmic beeping of machines filled the air, a reassuring symphony of life. He was back. He opened his eyes, gasping for breath. The backup generators had kicked in, casting a dim, yellowish light over the ward. A nurse was checking his vitals, her face etched with concern. You gave us a scare there, Mr. Ulv, she said. Your heart stopped for a moment. But you're back now. He looked at her, his gaze distant, his mind still reeling from the vision. He was back. But he was no longer the same. A second chance. Barth woke to a world painted in soft, muted light. The throbbing ache that had been his constant companion was gone, replaced by a strange lightness, a sense of buoyancy he hadn't felt in decades. He blinked, trying to focus on the blurry shapes around him. The antiseptic scent of the hospital still hung in the air, but it felt less oppressive, less like a cage. His chest felt tight, but not with the familiar, crushing pain. It was a different kind of pressure, a new sensation he couldn't quite decipher. He glanced down. The crisp white sheets covered him, and tubes snaked from beneath the blankets, disappearing into machines that hummed a quiet, rhythmic song. He remembered fragments of the vision, the blinding light, the overwhelming sense of love and forgiveness. Had it been a dream? A feverish hallucination? As if summoned by his thoughts, the door creaked open, and Dr. Alvarez entered, his face etched with cautious optimism. Bartholomew, he said, his voice low and gentle. You're awake. How are you feeling? Barth swallowed, his throat dry. Different, he croaked. Lighter. What happened? Dr. Alvarez smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression that eased some of Barth's anxiety. We found a donor. A young man, tragically taken too soon. His family made the selfless decision to donate his heart. The transplant was successful. The words washed over Barth, leaving him stunned. A new heart. A second chance. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed by a wave of emotion he couldn't name. Gratitude. Relief. Awe. It was all of those things, and something more, something profound and transformative. The next few days will be crucial, Dr. Alvarez continued, his voice pulling Barth back to the present. We need to monitor you closely for any signs of rejection. But so far, everything looks good. You're a very lucky man, Bartholomew. Lucky? No. He knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within his soul, that this was more than luck. This was a gift. A divine intervention. Weeks later, Barth stood on a makeshift stage in the hospital courtyard, the pale morning sun warming his face. A small crowd had gathered, nurses, doctors, fellow patients, and, most importantly, Maria. He looked out at their faces, each one a testament to the fragility and resilience of human life. He cleared his throat, his voice still raspy from disuse. I was a fool, he began, his words carrying on the gentle breeze. For 40 years, I lived a life of darkness, of anger, of defiance. I rejected everything that was good and true. I mocked faith, I embraced despair. He paused, his gaze meeting Maria's. Her eyes were filled with tears, but there was also a quiet joy radiating from her. But then, he continued, his voice gaining strength, I was shown mercy. I was given a second chance. And I know now that this second chance is not just for me. It's for me to use to help others, to spread love and compassion, to atone for the darkness of my past. He announced his intentions to dedicate his life to charity and service, working with the hospital and other organizations to ease the suffering of others. He publicly renounced his former beliefs, the hateful ideology he had once espoused. A few months later, Barth stood beside Maria in the hushed stillness of the church. The air was thick with the scent of incense and beeswax candles. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the altar in vibrant colors. He felt a peace he had never known before, a serenity that settled deep within his bones. They walked to the candle stand, each taking a slender taper. Maria lit hers first, the flame flickering to life, then offered the light to Barth. As he watched the flame dance on the wick, he felt a connection to something larger than himself, a sense of belonging he had craved for so long. Together, they placed their lit candles in the stand, joining the constellation of flickering lights, each one a prayer, a hope, a silent testament to faith. They knelt in the pew, side by side, and closed their eyes. Barth didn't know what to pray for. He had everything he could possibly need. Instead, he simply offered his gratitude, a silent thank you for the gift of life, for the love of his sister, and for the unwavering grace of the Virgin Mary.